I'm very excited to have you all here. My name is Anna, and I am a member of the Whole U team. At the Whole U, we create community and provide resources for holistic wellness for all members of the UW community. And today's panel is serving to provide a forum for discussion and reflection on the importance of diversity and inclusion in the workforce, with a special focus on the experience of women, especially in STEM fields. I'm really excited to welcome you all and to host these incredible panelists from the UW community who are all working to make UW a more inclusive and diverse space. At the Whole U, we really champion building relationships. I personally think it's an essential step to enhancing these types of conversations and making UW more inclusive for all of us. So I think we should all take a minute, build some community in this room. I would like you to share with the person next to you or in a small group just for about a minute your name and your role on campus. We have a mix of faculty, staff, and students, which is so great. And then why you decided to come today, really what made you show up. We just do that for about a minute and then we'll come back together. I'm now going to introduce our panelists and set some intentions for the next hour. Our 4 panelists come from across UW, and there's a lot I could tell you about all of them, but I'm going to keep it brief and let them introduce themselves to you later. Ebony Anderson is a diversity recruiter on the Total Talent Management team at UW Human Resources, charged with the responsibility of helping with the design, development, and implementation of diversity, equity, and inclusion-focused recruiting and sourcing strategies and programs. She's a member of the UW Diversity Committee. Magdalena Balazinska is a professor in the Paul G. Allen School of Computer Science and Engineering, the director of the UW Data Science Institute called eScience, and in January 2020, she'll begin her appointment as the director of the School of Computer Science and Engineering. Eve Riskin is Associate Dean of Diversity and Access in the College of Engineering, a professor of electrical and computer engineering, faculty director of the Advanced Center for Institutional Change, and a principal investigator of the NSF-funded STARS program at UW, which I'm sure she'll tell you more about. And finally, our moderator and also panelist, Katie Hall, is an affiliate professor in the Masters of Communications Leadership Program at UW, has co-founded both her own communications firm, Katie Hall Communications, and the Katie Hall Foundation, and is a community leader in women initiatives, including gender pay equity. And as I said, she'll be our moderator for the next hour. And before we dive into all that, I just want us all to recognize some key values for our discussion today that are also key values of the university, and those are vulnerability, courage, and compassion. I think it's very important to recognize that our panelists are being very gracious in sharing their stories, opinions, and being vulnerable with all of us. I'd like that as we all enter this room, we recognize we have our own experiences and perspectives that shape our unique realities. Some of what we talk about today may completely resonate with you, some of it may not. There's no room for judgment in this space, and I encourage all of us to lean in to sitting with discomfort, accepting non-closure, and to speak our truth. Our goal today is that whatever your role is at UW, you come away with something new, whether that be a new idea, a fresh perspective, maybe a new friend. You can always feel empowered through that. And with that, I'm going to kick it off to Katie and let her take it away.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We appreciate you from joining us on this rainy Monday. We hope to have a very fruitful conversation that will hopefully we can all leave out of here with something that we didn't come in a room with. If everyone can do me a favor before we get started and just, fold your arms the way you naturally fold your arms. Everybody got that? That feels pretty good, right? Pretty normal, comfortable. Let's go ahead and take our arms and fold it in the opposite direction. I don't know about you guys, but it's a little awkward for me. And so, as she mentioned earlier to us, today is all about being comfortable, being uncomfortable. We are all in this space to be able to grow and learn, and we have 3 excellent panelists that I'm going to ask questions to. But just remember, the floor is open to you as well, because this conversation is really about you, for you, as much as it is about the knowledge that our panelists are sharing. So at any moment that you want to ask a question, and if you're not able to project, I'm going to ask you that you come up front so that way you can use the microphone so that everyone can hear you. Can we stay on track with that today? Mm-hmm. Sweet. So before we go into our first set of questions, I would like for each of you just to tell us a little bit more about yourselves, because I understand the bio is probably just like a snapshot of who you are. Ebony, starting with you since you're to the left, can you tell the group a little bit about yourself?
How deep do you want me to go?
Not too deep. We have 48 minutes.
So I'm the diversity recruiter here in Total Talent Management. Prior to coming to the University of Washington, I worked in full cycle recruiting. Oh, do I need them? Yes. In full cycle recruiting in the healthcare agency, which is a very competitive market. And a lot of the work that I did was really around inclusive hiring. How are we making sure that we are providing opportunities for everyone? And so using those same principles, using those same values in diversity recruiting, because it's really recruiting. And it's really about making sure that our processes are more inclusive, which is going to allow us to bring more diversity to our workforce. And so that's really my philosophy around this work, that inclusion begets diversity.
Thank you. Yeah, oh yeah, you can go right ahead and pass the mic over.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So once again, my name is Magda Balazinska, and I'm going to be taking over as the next director of the Allen School. And I think maybe to introduce myself, I'll mention that I was actually born in Poland at the end of the 1970s. So it was communism at its peak. So the situation was pretty difficult. My family then moved to Algeria, so I actually went to elementary school in Algeria, which was exciting. We had the beautiful golden beaches without any tourists. Awesome. But at the same time, the school, for example, did not have any running water, which was an interesting experience. I then moved to Montreal, which is an awesome city to be a teenager. So I grew up there, went there all the way through college. I then went to MIT to do my PhD and then got a job here, so hopped on I-90. Drove all the way here with my husband and my cat, and I've been here ever since.
I get my own mic. So I'm Eve Riskin. I'm from New Jersey, so not as interesting. I'm here in my 30th year, and I'm an electrical engineer, and I came up through the system before there were many women in engineering, and so since 2001 I've had the opportunity to work on programs for women in science and engineering, and it makes my heart go thump thump thump. And more recently we've expanded to basically support people from all backgrounds, because if we leave out more than half of the population trying to find the best people, that's a really stupid thing to do, and you don't get the best solution.
Awesome. Thank you so much for introducing yourselves. Before I ask this first question, I just want everyone to take a second and think about, what does diversity and inclusion mean to you? With that being said, Ebony, since you're sitting to my left, would you share why you feel that diversity and inclusion is a core value in the workplace, and what does it mean to you?
I'm going to try to answer this question without going too deep. But I think diversity and inclusion in the workforce is really the first step in creating parity for those individuals and populations that are the most affected by social injustices or systemic injustices. Specifically, when you think about hiring here at the University of Washington and the access and resources that we're able to provide. When we hire someone here that comes from an underrepresented background or systemic non-dominant population, we're providing access and resources through livable wages, through the benefits that we offer here. When we think about tuition exemption, giving access to education, we know statistically that there are disparities in education, specifically for Latinx and African Americans when it comes to educational attainment. So we're providing access to furthering education. We're also providing access to benefits and health. We know there's health disparities amongst different demographics. And so I think when it comes to diversity and inclusion, it's really our social responsibility to make sure that we're creating a more inclusive and a more diverse workforce, so that we're also looking at how we can be helping more systemically, helping outside of the University of Washington, but also our surrounding communities. And for me, that's the most important part of building a diverse and inclusive workforce.
I see you. Yeah, I know. Yeah, at the end. I see you getting close to that microphone. And Magdalena, if you're okay with us ending with you. Eve, you said that you're from New Jersey, so you're from the other side of the country. I lived in New Jersey for 3 years, so it's real over there. Yeah, it's real. So can you talk to us a little bit about, what diversity and inclusion means to you? Because regionally, it means different things.
That's a really great question. Broadly, diversity and inclusion to me means showing up to work being yourself and not having to fit into the expectations of the local culture, which is traditionally based on systemic dominant groups. And so if we look at engineering, if you look at women, they typically they dress like men, a lot of them, right? Because of their experiences. If you work with people who are underrepresented minorities, they're constantly having to scan for danger. Well, people take this the wrong way. will people not understand where I'm coming from? And so it wastes so much mental energy for people who are in the non-dominant groups that people can't do their best work. And so that's why I feel really strongly as, I'm white, and my parents have both gone to college, so I had those advantages, and I feel like it's my responsibility to try and make our workplace and our classrooms more comfortable for students who didn't have the advantages that I had growing up. In particular, having, if you're the first in your family to go to college in 2019, that's rough.
Absolutely. Even in 2000, I was one of the first in my family to go to college in
It is
2000.
nice.
It still was rough. Magdalena, if you can end us off from more of an international perspective, like what does diversity and inclusion means to you?
So actually, to me, diversity and inclusion is also about coming to a workplace and having, all kinds of people around me working with me. And there are really two main reasons why I think this is really important, in addition to the reasons that my co-panelists have already shared. Reason number one is if we, especially in engineering, if we are diverse, we will produce better products. So I know probably all of you have had the experience where, when I drive my car, which I love my car, but the seatbelt is always too high, no matter how high I crank up my seat, and the visor is always too short. On the other hand, when I fly on a plane, I'm so comfortable. I stretch my legs and I don't understand the guy next to me complaining because it's just my size. So I think being just diverse definitely helps us make better products because we, design for a broader set of people. It also, my experience is that the more inclusive an environment is, the better it is even for people from the majority group. Because if we have, let's say just one majority group and people have these extreme behaviors, it's actually an unfun environment. An environment that's more welcoming for everyone and just more pleasant tends to be just nicer for everyone involved.
Awesome. So my next question, this is coming from the fact that we're at the top 14th school in the nation. What are the ways that we can all support our organization in making diversity and inclusion a priority? All the way from the students to the department leadership role, and anyone can answer this question first.
You got your own mic.
I mean, there are many different definitions of privilege, even going down to right-handed or perhaps the way you fold your arms. I don't know if that's a privilege. But almost everybody has some kind of privilege, and your role is to figure out what that is, be cognizant of it, and then when someone doesn't share your privilege, please be the person that calls out someone who is somehow offending that person, right? As a white person, I would like to be an ally for people from underrepresented minorities. It isn't up to the underrepresented minorities to fix the culture for them. It's up to the majority populations. As a woman in my work with female faculty, I have relied heavily on men. And it's really critical that men are part of the solution. So that's my suggestion, is figure out, make your list of where you have privileges and where you don't, and then change things where you do and hope that the people where you don't are going to do the same for you.
I'll piggyback on that. I think it's very important that we all examine our own privileges. And one thing I would kind of talk about is really understanding what it means to be an ally. So Dr. Harden, I'm not sure if you're familiar with her, but she's actually a professor at Seattle U. And she has a lot of great articles around like the difference between allyship, being an advocate, and also being an accomplice, right? With the idea that an ally is really around kind of understanding that there's some injustice happening, but not doing much about it. An advocate is like, I understand that injustices are happening and I'm going to speak about it if it doesn't hinder my own privilege, right? And then accomplice is really about how do I stand out and speak up for others, even if that means isolating myself socially or professionally or causing harm to myself in the sense of a risk of losing my job potentially, or a risk of not being in that in group because I'm really speaking up for that injustice. And so her work really speaks to me, and so I would say examine your privileges, but also examine in the sense of what are you doing with it, and are you doing enough? That would be the first step that I think everyone can do.
Can you read those three off again? You said ally?
Yeah, so ally, advocate, and accomplice. And so really determining, like, am I an ally? Am I being an advocate? Or am I really working to be an accomplice? And what does that mean to me? And what does that mean to those who I'm around? And what does it mean to the diversity and inclusion work that I desire and that I'm doing here at the university?
Awesome. Magdalena, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes. So one thing that I've noticed is that, especially nowadays, a lot of people actually want to be more inclusive and want to strive for diversity. And I've seen that we can make actually a lot of improvements, both kind of from being a participant in different things and from being the person making the decisions. So from a participant, just bringing things up. So I think maybe this echoes a little bit of the other comments. So for example, if let's say I'm part of an executive committee and we have to pick the next PC chair, and everyone will say, oh, of course, this top one person from MIT should do it. We can maybe pause and say, okay, well, that's maybe the first person we can think of. Let's try to think of other kinds of people from other countries, other regions, people from industry, people from different backgrounds, and just get people thinking and making a more inclusive shortlist. Can have a huge impact. So as a participant, people can come, they have ideas, and they can see, oh, I'm seeing that there's something we're doing that doesn't lead to good outcomes. Maybe we can do something about it. And as the person, if you ever in a decision-making role, just being open to this. When someone says, you know, the way we're doing something is not ideal, maybe we can do something better. Just being open to actually listening and saying, oh, that's right, maybe there is something that we could be doing better here. So one example is when I teach classes, I have the students, you know, they learn, they build stuff, and then I say, okay, come to class, and you'll have 20 minutes to write down a page or two and explain to me what you have really understood and explain to me how these things work. And of course, this doesn't work great if you have dyslexia. Something I didn't know until I realized both my kids have dyslexia, and then kind of really opening and starting to change things because people brought up the issue to me, and then I had a discussion with them, then I could make adjustments. So I think that's kind of it's continuously observing what's happening and being able to at least make changes and listening to people who suggest changes.
Awesome. So we just came off of a political campaign, in particular with the R88, the I-1000, and it was rejected by a 0.5 percentage point. I would happen to be the campaign communications director, so it personally impacted my sleep and my health. Happy to be off the campaign, but I think more importantly, putting politics aside, just talking about the divide in our state. In your experience, and any of your experience, what is your current culture at University of Washington regarding diversity and inclusion? What does that mean for University of Washington employees from minority backgrounds or women in STEM? Don't be afraid.
And this mic. I would say there's a lot of work being done around diversity and equity and inclusion at the University of Washington, but I also would say there's a lot of work to be done around diversity, equity, and inclusion work at the University of Washington. I think the most important part is understanding beyond numbers. So it's beyond just bringing and hiring more quote-unquote diverse candidates. If we're not creating environments, we're not creating practices, procedures, and policies that support inclusivity, that support diversity, that support difference, understanding that we're essentially bringing people into a potentially hostile environment or a very uncomfortable environment. So I think that's the big thing, is really looking at institutional bias. We're looking at our procedures and practices that we've been doing for a long time simply because this is the way we've always done it, and making sure that it's evident that those practices, those policies and procedures actually foster inclusivity. Because if we're not, then it's, like I said, creating an environment that's not going to be sustainable, and then we're going to end up with candidates or staff that come to the University of Washington and they're either going to quit and leave the organization, or they're going to quit and stay. And quit and stay is just as bad as quitting and leaving because they're not engaged, they don't feel valued, they don't feel connected. They're not creating those connections and those links and partnerships to really grow as an individual or grow professionally. And so I think that would be the biggest thing, is understanding about our procedures and practices. Is it evident that it's really creating value and that it's really creating an inclusive environment, making sure everyone feels valued, making sure everyone can reach their fullest potential, and understanding what that means. And understanding what inclusion means in practice, not just a fancy definition. And so that's going to vary. There's not a one-size-fit-all solution. There's not a one-size-fit-all policy or practice or procedure that's going to fix it all. Understanding from your individual team, understanding from your individual groups, but then also holistically. I think that would be some of the biggest work that we would need to do in the University of Washington. And I think a lot of the issues is around the decentralization. And so how can we be more collaborative? How can we make sure we're working with other departments and other units, not just internally, but also externally, working with community partners and agencies, I think will be the area that we can improve in the most.
I'm going to go next because you hit on it, Ebony. The fact that the University of Washington is so decentralized leaves it so rife to bias. Every organization within the institution has their own set of policies and procedures, or they don't have any, and they make it up as they go along. And when that happens, things are really fraught for bias. I'm watching it right now, spilling out in real time in my unit. It's just unbelievable. And Katie, you mentioned that I was from New Jersey, and you said it was real. New Jersey, you know who is stabbing you because they'll stab you right.
It feels better.
You know who it is. Here, you can see it coming. Here, they smile at you. They might say, "Ooh, let's go backpacking," and then they stab you in the back. And so, I think it is a real problem. I see a lack of uniformity in terms of best practices in hiring faculty. Our unit, we used to review candidate slates, and then suddenly it stopped, and now we're starting again to talk about it for faculty. Just basically say, show the dean's office who are the list of candidates you wish to interview, and then when they say, oh, it's all these 5 white guys from MIT and Berkeley, you could say, show me the dossier of the strongest woman and underrepresented minority, and you might say, bring them in too. And sometimes that person is much better than the people who looked really good on paper. So the best practices are really at the mercy of the deans and chairs wherever, and I think it's a real problem. Sorry, I'm not a cheerleader.
Well, I always tell people, a friend of mine told me once, a long time ago, we were grad students and it was hard, and he told me, Magda, life is a process. And that I think is kind of truth. It's just life is hard, and all we can do is wake up in the morning and try to push and try to make the world a better place. Even though not all of this is cheerful, because it's a process. Right, hopefully. But I just wanted to add one more thing that makes this really challenging. So in addition to the problem that people do want to do the right thing frequently, we don't quite have all the right policies and best practices in place everywhere. They're living in that uniform. So we're kind of at the stage where at least some people want to do the right thing, they're trying things, and we're kind of trying to figure it out. But I think one of the great challenges is that there's the kind of non-inclusive behaviors and practices that are very obvious, and these we can kind of get rid of. But there's so much subtlety, and I think this goes to the environment. So we have, for example, some faculty who come into our school, and everyone goes to them and says, oh, we're so happy you're here, come on to my grant, and I have this other grant, and let's collaborate. And we have other faculty who come, and people just kind of leave them be. And that makes a huge difference to the faculty themselves and their experience. But that's a very subtle, like how can we go to people and say, hey, it's actually different what happened for this one candidate versus this other candidate. And that I think is part of the challenge we are facing right now.
Absolutely. What barriers do women in STEM and minority women face in the workplace, and what can we truly do about it? If you had to give like a 1, 2, 3 toolkit.
Can I go first? I think one of the barriers is that women and underrepresented minorities have to be better to be seen as equal. My department, electrical and computer engineering, last year we made a faculty offer to an African American male. He went to Stanford. Can't we make offers to African Americans who don't get offers from the top 2 schools? Because we make offers to white men, to Asian men, to white women, well, not so many women lately, but so that is a huge barrier. And how you address it is you have rubrics and you treat everybody the same according to criteria that you've determined ahead of time so that the bar doesn't move up and down at the whim of people's gut feeling, because everybody has bias. Women are biased against women. So you have to really check your bias, be thoughtful, move slowly, and don't just go with your gut instinct. If I went with my gut instinct, my department would be all women, right? Small women, and we'd all, from New Jersey, and we'd all fit in.
Actually, I would like to add to this. I like that one thing that I think it's very difficult if you're different, and whether you're a woman or you're an underrepresented minority, or you might just be older than other people in the room. The huge challenge is that people just assume you're not quite as smart as everybody else. Mm-hmm. And if you're trying to make a point, they just don't think it's such a good point. And if you have an idea, by default, it's really not such a good idea. And I think versus if you're part of the people, like some people are more on pedestals, when they say an idea, that it's by default a good idea, a clever solution, and everyone should just do it. And that default perspective, whether by default you're right or by default you're wrong, makes a huge difference.
I would say we have to also be aware of the different dynamics and intersectionality, and how that shows up in the workplace, and how every individual, whether it's a woman or unrepresented minority, how our experiences are going to vary. And not assume that every black woman is having the same experience, that every woman of color is having the same experience, that every woman in the workforce is having the same experience. It varies due to intersectionality, and how ableism, racism, sexism, all the isms compound and create an experience. And I think a lot of what women experience is isolation, or constantly having their credentials questioned. I know I'm in HR, and in HR is predominantly white women. And the only time you really see men is in higher level positions, director or above positions. And so in my position, oddly as a diversity recruiter, my credentials are not questioned as much because of stereotype, oh, it's a black woman doing diversity recruiting, that makes sense. However, in my previous positions as a full cycle recruiter in healthcare and a very metric driven, like constantly having to prove myself, not necessarily on my team, but to the outside clients, to external, proving that I have the experience and the credentials, but mainly around the idea of like, a lot of us are the first and only on these teams, right? So when you come into these environments, you're not only the first and only on your team, you're the first and only one that looks like you that's experiencing these clients or ever speaking to these clients about something. And so just having your credentials questioned around that is huge. Also, some things that we can do is really leveraging your one-on-ones in your staff meetings. Those are opportunities for you to have quote unquote stage interviews. What experience is your staff actually having, and how are you making sure that they're feeling supported and valued on your team? Providing opportunities for like stretch projects, because a lot of things that happen in these environments too is that women and underrepresented minorities don't get the highly visible, glamorous projects where people can see their work and see their ability, or they can grow professionally. They're constantly kind of giving that kind of grunt work or those tasks that no one wants to do. So how do you create opportunities on your team to ensure that everyone's getting those opportunities, everyone's able to be visible, everybody's heard at the staff meetings? Are you paying attention to see who's like not speaking, or who keeps getting interrupted, or whose idea gets put out there but ignored, but when somebody else provides that same idea, it's all of a sudden valued, right? Paying attention to those things and finding ways to create that parity as the leader and as the supervisor, because you hold the highest privilege as the leader and as the supervisor on that team.
I'm going to actually piggyback off what you just said. So by a show of hands in the room, how many women have spoken up, gave an idea at a meeting, and you were just sort of like looked at, and then someone else came back and reinforced it, and it was their idea? By a show of hands. Okay. Look around the room. That's a lot. Have you ever seen that happen and you just maybe didn't think about saying anything? Right? Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you for being honest too and having your hands up. So for the 3 women on the panel, my question to you is, I'm sure it's happened to every last one of us on this panel. Think back to the last time it happened to you, and if you could go back now after seeing all of these hands in the room, what would you say to yourself, and what would you say to the people in the room?
That's good. I think in those situations, it's always a struggle of when to speak up, right? Is this the right opportunity to have this conversation? And then when is that window of opportunity passed? And so I think knowing what I know, being more okay with speaking up when I experience that in the moment, and not just accepting it, right? I think often we accept these things as the norm, and we don't want to push the envelope, and we don't want to already create further isolation for what we already feel. But I would say I would tell myself to speak up and make sure that I'm reinforcing that. Also, we don't want to be in a situation where we're trying to say, give me credit for this, right? So having that balance and really being honest in my one-on-ones. And those opportunities that I have to speak with my supervisor. Because I think oftentimes we say things are going great or things are fine when we really have some issues going on. We're just afraid of what bringing up those issues would do. Maybe they don't cause any change, or maybe they cause further issues. But being okay with speaking up about that is probably what I would tell myself, and probably what I would work on doing more of.
I think this is a really hard problem. I think that if that happens to, let's say if I speak up and someone just mentions the idea, I don't have it figured out. What I notice is that if someone else says an idea and that idea is maybe ignored, or maybe someone else reiterates it, then as a third person you can say, oh, the way such and such said, or I really like the idea of such and such. That can be a huge help, because now the idea was said, it was reiterated, and it was emphasized that the person said it. And I actually started to tell a lot of my colleagues, and I say, one thing I've noticed in academia is when some of those people on a pedestal say something or achieve something, it's going to be such and such did this, such and such had this workshop for this company, such and such person did this other, wrote this paper, versus when people who are not on a pedestal do it, it's going to be, oh yeah, this was done. And this wasn't done. So I tell people, try in all the cases to reiterate the person's name, because by reiterating the person's name, they get that credit. And I think we just don't think about it. For some people, we do it, and for other people, we just ignore their names. Or the same thing that now we have there's more of an effort to resuscitate a lot of the women who are great and, did a lot of great, discoveries and inventions in computer science. And of course, no one knew about them. Now we start to talk about them. But people say, oh yeah, there was this woman. And I'm like, no. What was her name? And let's keep repeating her name, because that's really important.
I can't really remember the last time, but I like to say, I just said that, but it says a lot better when you say it because you're a man. So that's... And then probably 5 years ago, I swear this happened twice in 1 week, people gave credit to a woman for a man's idea. So I said, they gave Joyce credit for Dan's idea, and I said, Dan just said that, but now you're giving credit to Joyce. That happens all the time. That was a joke? Maybe a little subtle, but I was basically trying to highlight what normally happens. They got it, even if you didn't. Sorry. I think it had to be done.
That was good. I was like, oh, really? Right. What is the most important lesson each of you have learned as a female leader in the STEM career? In our HR?
I think, do you want me to go first?
Yes.
Since I still have the mic. I think, number one, what we say to the younger people is you have to succeed first. So if you're on the tenure track, then get tenure first. And even then become full professor. So work within the system, be successful, and then spend your time changing the system. I think that's really important, and that's been a privilege for me. The minute I became full professor, then I became the director of advance, and so I've had almost 2 decades working to try and change this place. And I think it's also important to have some fun, because if you're just miserable all the time, then the students following you are going to say, ugh, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be miserable all the time. So I always say I made up the word venture, which is it's basically a mentor to whom you vent. So you have someone who's safe, you go in your office, you close the door, and then you say, can you believe what I said? Or right now I hate everyone in the world except you and me. Then you process it, and then you move on.
So I don't think I have one thing I learned, but many little things. So some things I kind of learned over time. One, the most important is that it's really about perseverance. Change is slow. It's very slow, but change happens. So it's really about like waking up every morning and saying, today I can make the world a little bit better, and drinking coffee. And at night you're like, okay, that's it. There's nothing I can do, and that's all I could do, and have a glass of wine. How things go. But there's also other things that I started to practice. One is just seeing sometimes our disadvantages can be our advantages. Like, I'm a woman, and I'm really a woman, right? But when I teach my students, they're all like children to me. So then in class, I tell them all these mom jokes about how I tried to get my kids into Saturday morning classes, and I have exactly 5 minutes to register them on the website, and how, if I try to do it, my friend tries to do it, I can yank her network cable, then her transaction aborts my transaction commits, and that's how transactions work, right? And people kind of know, so I can use who I am, or the fact that as a woman also people will tend not to add me to all their grants, but this has an advantage that I get to work on what I want, and I can, versus being spread too thin. So there's a lot of our disadvantages that can come as our advantages that we can try to push. Definitely always being ourselves is very, very important. But the other thing I started to doing, which my husband actually pushed me to do, he's like, sometimes think like a guy. And I'm like, well, this is odd. But he's like, well, there's opportunity comes up, and I'm like, oh, I shouldn't do it. I don't quite have time. And he's like, well, what will your male colleague do? I'm like, well, of course, take it. And he's like, well, then take it. And I think that some of it has been helpful. And I probably have a million other little things like that. So not one thing, but just perseverance and picking. Oh, the other important thing I noticed, yes, that I wanted to say, that life is really like a poker game. So when something happens, you're like, okay, this is a poker game. That was the move. Let me breathe deeply and think, what will be my next move in this situation?
I would say one of the most important things I learned is really the importance of influence and positionality, and understanding how that impacts your own biases, your own outlook and perspectives, but also others' perspectives of you, and utilizing that to your advantage. Kind of similar to what you were saying, utilizing your disadvantages, your positionality, your identity to your advantage in different circumstances, and then your ability to influence. The other biggest lesson I learned specific around diversity, equity, inclusion work is not everyone that says they want diversity really wants it. Not every organization that says they want it really wants it, and they're not prepared for what diversity really means. And really that's around change and difference. And so understanding those dynamics, understanding the position that you're in, the influence and who you're speaking with, and being able to not get so caught up in how people think and feel, but what actions, practices, procedures, and policies that we can create that enforces those actions and creates accountability. Because people can think what they want, they can tell you anything to your face and completely have a different mentality, especially here in Seattle in the Northwest. We're known for being passive aggressive. And so creating those practices, things that are actionable. And then ways to hold people accountable for those things. Because if I can hold you accountable in your actions, I really don't care what you think in that sense of how it's going to create change. And when we think about whether we change somebody's mind, not being so concerned with changing their mind, but changing their actions.
Yes, do you want to come up or do you like to project?
I'll just stand up. Thank you for being here. I'm curious what you think about the recent climate survey that the university tried to, we did, and the fact that we saw multiple messages that only a quarter of the students and the faculty and staff were responding. So once you got into it, you realized it wasn't about air temperature, it was about exactly what we're talking about here. So just, do you think that shows complacency, passive aggressiveness, just not doing surveys? I just wonder if you think that has any signs of where we are at the University of Washington in terms of what we're talking about today.
Trying to figure out how to work this. When we look at diversity and equity and inclusion, when we look at agencies and organizations in different studies of where there's the biggest challenge, the number one issue is this idea that it's not an issue. It's not a problem. We're diverse, right? So if you're part of the dominant group, you may not realize that it's an issue. You may not realize that people don't feel included here, or people do feel isolated, or people are dealing with these different things. And so I think that is a testament to the lack of diversity that we have at the University of Washington in that sense, because it's an opportunity for people to really have a voice. And so I think it's really around this idea that maybe it's not really an issue here. And I think that's the importance of like data and numbers and really being able to get a good pulse of what's going on. But if we don't get people to participate, that makes it tough to really get that information. But I think it's really around that idea that it's not really an issue here. And I think that's unfortunate because that goes to show how much work we actually have to do.
It was pretty triggering, right? If you took it, at the end they had that, saying you after a human subjects form, here are some resources. Because I was in a cranky mood, and boy, I felt like I really unloaded more than I actually normally feel. It was unfortunate the time I took it, but it's a concern. Also, people hate surveys, and they're always getting, I talk about death by survey. There's never a good time to survey people. I know we were actively trying to tell other people, please don't send out a survey now, please don't send out a survey now, but surveying, it's all about timing, right? But I don't know. That's a good question, though.
You want to add anything? Or are you good?
I don't have a good answer.
Oh, yes. You want to stand up?
I think I'm loud enough. How do we hold the university leadership accountable for diversity and inclusion on this campus? And I say that because I used to do this work, and I was at 2 hospitals in New York. One was, we were the remedy. The other was, they invited us in. We met the CEO of one hospital. She was everywhere. The other one, we never saw the CEO. The one where we saw the CEO, every person who worked there was held accountable for diversity and inclusion.
That's a good question.
Magdalene, you want to answer it?
I think this is a good question, right? And I think the answer, as you can see by the silence, is that we don't have it quite figured out, right, at the university, especially what would be the best way to hold people accountable. What we have been trying to do so far is mostly to think about, like, just what are the best practices, how can we make things better, and the main feedback loop is mostly at the faculty level, faculty complaining that we could be doing something better, and then us trying to change how we do things, and kind of really trying to change the mentality of the faculty and the group. And this is a slow process, but without really having any kind of official accountability. We try to have that feedback loop with the graduate students as well. So we actually did also a climate survey internally in the Allen School to try to understand how are the graduate students doing, how can we make sure that their advisors are providing good support for them. So we do try to have these feedback loops. I don't think we have it figured out the answer to the question of what would be the right way to actually have accountability. Do we want to, because if we just like count numbers, then people do all kinds of things just to get the numbers right, and that also hurts us. And actually, especially as a woman, if someone tries to push to get the numbers right, I'm like, no, this is terrible, because we want to make sure people are here and everybody knows they're here because they are they are above bar, they're great, and everyone wants them to be here. So I think it's a tricky, maybe something we should brainstorm about.
I was going to say we could write letters, we could work collaboratively together to let the university know that this is important to us, and I think really work against the decentralization and figuring out other ways to collaborate with other departments. I'm a diverse recruiter, so I know that there's a lot of departments that have a whole bunch of different equity committees, diversity committees, a whole bunch of them all around campus that don't know what each other's doing. And so being able to create spaces where everyone who's doing this work, the true champions around diversity, equity, inclusion, are coming together and really talking about some of the successes, the challenges and barriers, but really also coming together and using democracy and being able to say, this is important to us, this is why it's important to us, and we have to do this across the institute, not just in my department. It happening just in your department or organization is not enough. So I would say really building opportunities for collaboration. And that goes against the norm here. That goes against the culture. But really finding those opportunities to do that. As a recruiter, and really around my strategy, is trying to find consistencies in our hiring processes. So that's the biggest thing to me, is really around standardization. And I know that's tough because every university, every department, every unit kind of has their own unique thing going, which is fine, but finding some form of standardization across the board that still allows for that creativity and the uniqueness of each department, because we have to find a way to be able to track these things and hold people accountable. The other issue around this work is really we are a state institution, and so there's a lot of red tape that we have to go to, a lot of vetting when we're talking about changing practices and policies and procedures, but I do think there's strength in numbers, and there's strength in collectivity. So making sure that we're all working together, so it doesn't just seem like it's an isolated group that's interested in this work, but that it's really something that's valued across the campus. And that's easier said than done, but really looking for those opportunities to collaborate, I would say would be the biggest takeaway and the first thing that you can do.
And I think a real issue is the lack of accountability. I remember being at one of the diversity committees, Ricky Hall and Chad Allen, and I think we were talking about the diversity blueprint. And then you hear people say, well, the deans will be accountable. And so the deans are working on 18,000 different things. And so if they have a department that just brought in $50 million in grants, but they lost their one African-American faculty member, what is the dean going to say to that department chair? They're going to say, great, you brought in $50 million. So I wish there were some kind of external accountability entity here who would be collecting the data, sharing the data, highlighting the data. I think it's more centralized at University of California system. I read, they have a whole document. They have Prop 209, which is like R200. Yep. They had this fabulous handbook on best practices under Prop 209. I read, and they had it for faculty, staff, graduate students, undergraduates. There's lots you can do, but speaking back to Katie's question about this unfortunate I-1000 not passing, or Ref 80, I still, first of all, it was like a double negative. I think a lot of people were very confused, but unfortunately we're stuck with I-200. And you hear people hide behind it all the time to not engage in best practices around building up a diverse pool. We're not saying hire Eve because she's a woman. We're saying don't not hire Eve because she's a woman, which is what used to happen. And if you don't engage in best practices to build up a diverse pool, you're going to keep advantaging white males. And that is illegal under I-200, right? So anyway, I really wish we had more accountability coming from on high. And I will go on record saying that.
She's on record. So speaking of data, thank you so much for talking about data so much. Pay scale, currently in our state, women on average is 77 cents, all women, 77 cents on a dollar in comparison to white men. White women are 80 cents on a dollar in comparison to white men. Black women are 62 cents on a dollar in comparison to white men. And Hispanic women is an alarming 56 cents on a dollar when it comes to comparing their pay to white men, which Latino Women Equity Day was just last week on November the 15th. When you hear that, how can we, and so that impacts all of us, even if the men in the room can raise their hands again, especially some of you guys are in pockets, it impacts all of you as much as it impacts us, because if it's your wife, your mother, your daughter, right, sister, and if they don't have the same amount of money, I think that makes it a conversation that's important to all of us. So women, how can we advocate for women for gender pay equity?
I would say know the numbers. So as you mentioned, know the numbers, educate yourself, encourage all women to negotiate. In the work that I do, women, specifically women of color, tend not to negotiate. One of the practices that I recommend all hiring managers do when you make an offer, always make your highest offer. I know we have this traditional practice that says, okay, let's give them a little bit less than what we actually have budget, or we can give them and see if they negotiate. Well, the problem is women and women of color tend not to negotiate. So you're already bringing them in, creating that disparity, and we already know what the increases look like from an annual basis. So you're not going to catch up. The other thing I would say is, as women, when you're negotiating or when you're in a position to get an offer, ask them, what is your internal equity policy? And how do you hold people accountable to that? Ask them, what is their salary policy in general? How do you guys determine salary? How did you determine my salary? And how am I compared to other men and women with similar experience and backgrounds? They don't have to give you the exact like names or information. They can still give you numbers. But being able to ask those tough questions. The thing is, as a recruiter, I'm not going to say, oh, we're not going to hire you because you asked me about that. We're not going to hire you because you negotiated. If I have the ability to pay you more, I'm going to try to pay you more because the offer is already on the table. A lot of us think that the offer may be rescinded, or we may lose the offer by negotiating, asking those questions. Go ahead and ask those questions. And for hiring managers, those are not red flags. And so I say that because often when a candidate asks questions about pay and equity and benefits and all that comes in their salary, we tend to think those are red flags. So they're asking all these questions, that's a red flag. No, that's them being educated, and that's them making sure they're taking care of themselves. And you got to think, this person has to be okay with this salary for a long time. So from a retention standpoint, you know that we're not going to give them these drastic increases every year. So they have to be happy and satisfied with this pay for a long time. And we know it's very competitive out there in the market, and the best way to get the raise is to leave and go to another company, right? So making sure we're always giving our best offer, and making sure we're always negotiating. Even if they come back and say they can't do more, at least negotiate it, because that's how you're helping to try to bridge that gap.
So maybe I would like to echo a few things that Ebony was saying. So one, definitely know your numbers. I think this one strongly resonates with me. And it's hard to, in some cases, like, here we're at the public university, so I can look up other people's salaries. And that's good, because then you know if you're falling behind or if you're not falling behind. In other cases, even in private industry, people have friends have friends. It's good to just talk and ask, and eventually people just talk to each other and they will say, like, what's a reasonable salary for different levels. So the more you can figure that out, the more you can ask for exactly the right level. So that's, I think, one thing. The other thing that maybe I will also add is that I've noticed that a lot of people think that they should get a promotion like every year. So like every year they go to their manager, like, I'm doing so awesome, should I go up for promotion? So maybe especially to the woman out here, you should try to put yourself up for promotion like way faster than you think you should, because other people think they should get a promotion every year, and then like, oh, I didn't get it. But then next year, then like, they think you should get it. So I think that the fact that some people keep pushing, and they always keep pushing, and I see this, like, my husband works for Microsoft, so kind of the discussions around those compensations. Actually, something I enjoy at the university, there's much less at stake here. So we're, kind of the differences a little bit smaller, at least, for faculty within departments than maybe in industry, but just knowing that other people really are pushing. They keep saying, I deserve it, and they keep thinking I should go up, so try to also push yourself faster than you think you should.
And I love this question, and I've held myself back here. But first of all, the accountability office that I wish we had would be monitoring these data. But I have upsetting anecdote. So as part of Advance, which is the program that I lead for female faculty in science and engineering, every 2 years we collect data, including salary. I mean, we do it on the odd year. So in fall 2015, I noticed that there was a 13% salary differential between the males and the females in the College of Engineering at the full professor level. So of course the men got 13% on average higher. So I went to one of my esteemed male colleagues and I said, this is a bit of a problem. And you go, first of all, I won't even go there. People, when they shared the data, and I won't say who they is, they said, well, what are you going to do if you find a discrepancy? And that was, to me, one of the most offensive questions I ever heard, because you're saying, I'm looking for information and that becomes my responsibility to fix it. Why aren't you fixing it? It was an essential unit, but that's a different story. So finally, my esteemed male colleague explained, oh, the reason that there's this differential is that there are many more full professors in the engineering departments that pay women less, namely human-centered design and engineering, and I think industrial and systems engineering, and maybe there was one other, and there are fewer full professors who are women in electrical and computer engineering and computer science and engineering. And so I said, oh, okay. And then in fall 2017, now there's a 16% differential. So obviously I'm really interested in see what comes in for fall 2019. But when I thought more deeply about their answer, that is so offensive. I mean, what he was basically saying was that there were gender biases in the hiring processes in computer science and engineering and in my department. So if anything, it was even worse than he thinks it is. So what I am going to do is, now that we have a new dean who started 2+ weeks ago, I'm going to tell her about this. Because it's, and now I'm on film saying this. But, it's not my role to hide inequities in the system. They need to be outed. So, and let them fire me if they want. I don't, I have tenure. That's
It's interesting being sitting on both sides of the table. I have about 12 college young ladies that work with me every summer. And this summer, they put their contracts out there where they all saw it. And for a moment there, like my stomach was, why did they do that? You're not supposed to do that. And I was like, oh yeah, this is what I'm preaching about. It's good that they're doing it. They're sharing their pay with each other. And it was the college girls pushed us to that. So I do have one more question, unless someone else in the room has a question, because I think that's all we have room for is one more question. Is there anyone that has a question that that's burning? Go ahead, Stella.
I had a question about as far as it having to do with diversity and equity and inclusion. Who is advising the president on how she should stand for this? Because I know for a fact, I've been here for almost 6 years, and I have seen biases in her emails that she sends out, certain issues she wants to address with a lot of passion and energy. Some other issues are considered footnotes to support that issue, which is one group. The type of activities that can have, like the affirmative action bake sale, her handling of that to me showed a lot of indifference. She wanted to address it after the fact in hindsight instead of with some foresight. So what are these agencies around the university working in diversity and inclusion doing to support her to be a better representative other than just being a female who's LGBTQ and here for immigration rights? There's more of us than that. So how can we make her more of a whole, I would say, face for the university?
Excellent question. Wow. All right, and we have to answer it. We have 4 minutes. Each of you have like a minute and a half to answer.
I say, like, in the survey, there was very few places to put that,
But I thank you for answering that question. It's not a comfortable question to ask. So who wants to go ahead and tackle that?
I know the diversity committee. I said, I think the real answer to that is we're not sure. We don't know exactly who advises. My position doesn't go that high up. But I think like the diversity committee that's supposed to be bringing representatives across. I just joined the committee, so I haven't actually even sat in a meeting yet. But that has representation from all the different units and departments. They're essentially supposed to be the model and the representation of diversity and equity and what's important and what we need here. And I'm sure that gets trickled up. But as far as like a direct advisor, I don't know who that would be and who has access to that, but I know the diversity committee is heavily involved.
I would think also, what about the board of directors?
The Board of Regents.
The Board of Regents,
Yes.
I will say, I don't know, other than I don't think it's well understood at this university, the difference between hate speech and free speech. And so I don't know if, I've asked lawyers and they can't answer it. And until we could understand that, it makes people, they're very unlitigious. They're litigious averse here. The attorneys general, they don't want to get sued. And so people are always walking that fine line on the side of being in favor of the hate speech. I'm not saying Anna Maria is in favor of hate speech, of course not. But I see things that really I think are very painful. And I don't think anyone really understands very well. That's my own opinion.
Mostly is just with like having that be an avenue for safe space because we are a public institution. And when we have activities like that, it's open to the public. And so we attract a lot of, excuse my language, filth that come here to stir up, you know, hurtful and dangerous situations. We have people that live here. So that was basically my concern, like how can she be advised about safe space, if that helps.
I think as a result of this panel, it would be nice to maybe bring some stuff back and see if, I mean, I don't know. I'm a affiliate, so don't get rid of me. But, just saying, first order. But it might be interesting to bring the president to maybe some type of open town, like a town hall.
Some transparency.
Yeah, town hall or some type of transparency. And I guess also it kind of goes back to, and I'm not making any excuses whatsoever. I promise you I'm all about advocating for women and girls. But sometimes this goes back to also women needing, you know, leadership opportunities before they get into leadership roles and having ways to express themselves and also having their own personal board of directors that can be honest with them, and can be real with them and not just be PC, to your point. So I don't know, I will leave with that. We truly have 1 minute. Do you want to go ahead and stand up?
Okay, all right. I thought I was gonna get the mic.
You want a mic, sis?
I'm gonna try and loop some of the concerns and questions together. My name is TK.
Microphone, please.
My name is TK, and I'm a member of the Postdoc Diversity Alliance. And I'm gonna give context. I'm also on the Diversity Council. And to answer your question, for those in the room who are interested in diversity and inclusion in terms of the institutional commitment, I would suggest just starting with the website Office of Minority Affairs and Diversity. There's a diversity blueprint. There's also the Race and Equity Initiative. And I'm not here to stand up for anyone. I do agree that there should be some transparency. I did a lot of research on my own, and I have meetings, and so I am taking that step for my group. What I would encourage everyone is to find those local spaces within the university. The university is really large. So like Eve mentioned earlier, in each college, there is a diversity lead. So there are several committees going on. You have the Diversity Council, and you also have diversity leads. Ricky Hall is the vice president, and I know he is welcome to talk to people at any time, except that he's only one person, right? And so I really like the idea of the town hall and these collective questions, because some of them I've asked myself, and so maybe that's an opportunity for, you know, our institutional leadership to give us some answers. In terms of the climate survey, I've been at an institution where they've done that before, so 25% is actually good. If you look at, even though Sue and Rankit have done it at many universities before, at comparable size universities, 25% is great. And this is just coming also from a person that does educational research. Like she mentioned, people who care will take it, and the people who don't really see a problem, they won't, right? And so it's up for us to encourage the next person to be like, hey, and this is where the allyship comes in. Like, speak for those. If you really truly care about the work, then take the survey and speak up for the person, because you do see the injustice. The survey is done, but you could still send comments, right? And so I just want us to leave on a positive note. I am a recipient of your allyship, right? And so I just want to just encourage us, like, there is hope. But I'm really glad that these questions came up. Okay.
Thank you. No, thank you so much. And thank you for standing up. We just want to thank you for coming out, and whenever we do more, we will definitely reach out to everyone. Thank you so much to our panelists, and everyone have a wonderful day.
And let's just do another round of applause for Katie being an amazing moderator.